He earned 33 awards and medals, killed 240 enemy soldiers, and then Hollywood asked him to do it all again. On camera. To Hell and Back wasn't just a war movie. It was a soldier reliving his worst nightmares for America's entertainment. The studio wanted glory. Murphy wanted to forget. But behind the cameras, nothing went as planned. Props exploded early. PTSD episodes shut down filming. And one scene, it triggered flashbacks so violent the crew had to pull him out. These are 20 weird facts about To Hell and Back. And the bonus, the Army tried to stop it from being made. Lock and load. This mission gets dark fast. Number 1. Audie Murphy didn't want to make this movie.
Just a couple years older than you, I quit to go in the Marines back when we was in the big war.
Not at first. Universal Pictures bought the rights to his autobiography in 1951, 4 years before filming began. They saw dollar signs, a war hero playing himself, an authentic story straight from the battlefield. But Murphy saw something else entirely. He saw his friends dying again. He saw the faces of men he couldn't save. He saw himself at 19 years old, covered in blood, manning a burning tank destroyer while German soldiers closed in from every direction. The studio pushed hard. They offered money, creative control, final say on the script. Murphy kept refusing. He told them he wasn't an actor. He said the memories were too fresh, too painful, too real to parade in front of cameras for strangers to watch with popcorn. But then something changed his mind. It wasn't the money, it wasn't the fame, it was the other veterans, the ones who came home broken, forgotten, dismissed. Murphy realized that if he told his story honestly, maybe people would finally understand what soldiers actually went through. Maybe they'd stop treating war like a John Wayne fantasy. So he said yes, not for glory, for truth. And that decision nearly destroyed him. Number 2. Before Audie Murphy, the studio wanted someone else.
Reaction from inoculation.
Yes, sir,
Someone bigger, someone safer, Tony Curtis. He was young, handsome, contract ready, and already a rising star at Universal. The executives loved the idea. Curtis playing Murphy would keep the production clean, controlled, easy to manage. But when Murphy heard about it, he drew a line. He told the studio flat out, if they didn't let him play himself, there would be no movie. Not because of ego, because no actor, no matter how talented, could understand what it felt like to watch your best friend die in your arms. No one could fake the weight of survivor's guilt or the sound of incoming artillery that still woke him up screaming in the middle of the night. Curtis was gracious. He stepped aside without complaint. And Murphy stepped into a role that wasn't a role at all. It was a mirror. Every scene, every line, every stage death pulled him back into the war he'd been trying to escape for 10 years. The studio got their authenticity, but they had no idea what that authenticity would cost the man delivering it. Murphy wasn't acting. He was remembering. And that's what made every frame unbearable and unforgettable. Number 3. The Army didn't want this film to exist.
We've been looking over your file. Spent the first week of basic training.
Not because of politics or propaganda, because of Audie Murphy himself. By 1954, Murphy was still in the Army Reserves. Technically, he was under their jurisdiction. And when Universal announced they were making a film based on his combat experiences, military brass panicked. They worried the movie would glorify individual heroism over unit cohesion. They feared it would make war look too brutal, too chaotic, too real for recruitment purposes. Some officials even suggested the film violated protocol by turning classified tactics into public entertainment. So they did what bureaucracies do best. They delayed. Permits were slow-walked, military advisors were pulled, equipment requests sat on desks for months. The studio was furious. Murphy was caught in the middle, but he had leverage. He was a living legend, a hero the country worshipped. And the Army knew if they blocked him too aggressively, the backlash would be worse than anything the movie could show. So, they relented, reluctantly. They provided minimal support, kept their distance, and watched nervously as Murphy prepared to show America what war actually looked like. No speeches, no flags waving in slow motion. Just mud, blood, and the kind of fear that never really goes away. Number 4. Murphy insisted on casting real veterans.
I never had any shots before.
Spent most of the trip over.
Not Hollywood stuntmen in uniforms. Actual combat veterans who knew what a firefight sounded like, who understood how to hold a rifle, who could move through a trench without looking like they were performing. The studio resisted. Real veterans weren't trained actors. They couldn't hit marks reliably. They'd never worked with cameras, but Murphy didn't budge. He told the producers that if they filled the screen with actors playing dress-up, the whole thing would feel like a lie. And he was done lying about war, so they brought in dozens of veterans. Some had fought in World War II, others in Korea. A few had served alongside Murphy himself in Europe. What happened next was unexpected. These men didn't just follow directions. They corrected the script, they adjusted tactics. They told the director when a scene felt wrong, and they brought something no acting coach could teach: the 1,000-yard stare, the way soldiers move when they're exhausted, the dark humor that keeps you sane when everything around you is insane. Murphy trusted them completely, and in return, they protected him. When he started shaking during a particularly intense scene, they surrounded him, gave him space, let him breathe, because they'd all been there. And they knew you don't push a man reliving his trauma. You just stand close enough to catch him if he falls. Number 5. The famous tank scene almost killed him. Not metaphorically, literally.
I never been on the ocean before.
Don't let them old soldiers eat.
In the film's climax, Murphy's character climbs onto a burning M10 tank destroyer and fights off German forces single-handedly. It's the defining moment of his military career, the action that earned him the Medal of Honor. And recreating it nearly ended his life. The special effects team rigged the tank with pyrotechnics, fuel, and controlled explosions designed to simulate battle damage. Murphy climbed on top, just like he had during the real battle at Colmar Pocket in 1945. The cameras rolled, the explosions fired, and then something went wrong. One charge detonated early, flames shot higher than planned. Murphy felt the heat sear across his back. For a moment, he froze. He wasn't in California anymore. He was back in France, 20 years old, freezing cold, Germans everywhere, friends dying. The director yelled, "Cut." The crew rushed in. Murphy didn't move. He just stood there on the burning prop, staring into nothing. Finally, a grip climbed up and pulled him down. Murphy blinked, came back, apologized, asked to do another take. The crew refused. They'd seen enough. That scene made it into the film, and if you watch closely, you can see it in his eyes. That's not acting. That's a man confronting the moment that defined and destroyed him. Number 6. Murphy couldn't sleep during production. The nightmares were relentless. Every night, he'd wake up drenched in sweat, reaching for weapons that weren't there, calling out names of men who'd been dead for a decade. His co-stars heard him through hotel walls, thrashing, shouting, sometimes sobbing. During the day, he'd show up on set exhausted, hollow-eyed, moving through scenes on muscle memory and sheer willpower. The director noticed but didn't know what to do. This wasn't something you could fix with a longer lunch break. Murphy refused medication. He refused therapy. He just kept working. But the crew started to worry. Between takes, he'd disappear. They'd find him sitting alone, staring at nothing, chain-smoking cigarettes down to the filter. Sometimes he'd talk, quietly, about men he served with, about decisions he made that haunted him, about the weight of being called a hero when all he felt was guilt for surviving. The film's production schedule stretched longer than planned because some days Murphy simply couldn't function. He'd stand in front of the camera, try to deliver a line, and freeze. The words wouldn't come. The memory was too strong, so they'd shut down. Wait. Give him time. And eventually, Murphy would shake it off, apologize to everyone, and push forward. Because that's what soldiers do. They complete the mission, no matter the cost. Even when the enemy is their own mind. Number 7. Universal wanted a sanitized script. The kind of war movie that made audiences feel good about sacrifice. But Murphy fought them on every page. He crossed out dialogue, rewrote scenes, removed moments that felt too Hollywood. He told the screenwriter, "If you make this pretty, you make it a lie." The battles weren't noble. They were chaos. Men didn't die with profound last words. They died screaming, confused, calling for their mothers. Murphy wanted that truth on screen, not to traumatize audiences, to honor the reality of what soldiers endured. The studio compromised. Some. They kept the violence but softened the edges. They let Murphy play the exhaustion and fear, but added moments of camaraderie and hope. It wasn't perfect. Murphy knew the real story was darker, messier, more complicated than any 2-hour film could show. But it was closer to truth than anything Hollywood had made before. And that mattered. Because for years, war films had sold a fantasy. Brave men, clear missions, good versus evil. To Hell and Back didn't erase that completely. But it cracked the facade. It showed mud, fear, confusion, and a young soldier who survived not because he was superhuman, but because he refused to stop fighting, even when every instinct screamed at him to run. Number 8. The film was shot in Washington State, not Europe. The studio couldn't afford to film overseas, so they found forests, fields, and rural landscapes in the Pacific Northwest that could pass for France and Germany. It worked visually, but for Murphy, it created a strange dissonance. He'd walk onto sets designed to look like battlefields where his friends died, except they were surrounded by American trees, American crew members, American safety regulations. Nothing was real, except his memories. And that made everything harder. During one scene, they were filming a river crossing. Murphy was supposed to lead his squad through cold water under simulated enemy fire. The cameras rolled. He stepped into the river, and suddenly he was back at the Volturno River in Italy. 1943. Bullets cutting through water. Men beside him dropping. Blood mixing with the current. Someone called his name. He didn't respond. The assistant director called cut. Murphy just stood there, waist deep, shivering. Eventually, a production assistant waded in and guided him back to shore. Murphy apologized. Again. He was always apologizing, as if reliving trauma was somehow his fault. The scene was eventually completed, but it took 6 takes. Not because Murphy couldn't act, because he couldn't stop remembering. And in those moments, the set disappeared. The cameras disappeared. And Audie Murphy was 19 years old again, watching people die, unable to save them, knowing he'd carry their faces forever. Number 9. Charles Drake nearly quit. He played Murphy's close friend and fellow soldier, and watching Murphy suffer through production broke him. Drake wasn't a veteran. He couldn't understand what Murphy was reliving, but he saw the toll, saw the sleepless nights, saw the way Murphy would zone out between takes, lost in places the rest of them couldn't reach. Drake later said it was the hardest job he'd ever done. Not because of the physical demands, because he felt like he was participating in something cruel, watching a man torture himself for a paycheck and public consumption. He considered walking away, telling the studio he couldn't be part of this anymore. But Murphy asked him to stay, told him it mattered that the people around him understood what was at stake. Drake stayed, and he became one of Murphy's closest allies on set. When Murphy struggled, Drake would distract him with jokes. When the nightmares got bad, Drake would sit with him in the hotel lobby at 3 a.m. just talking about nothing. Baseball, cars, anything but war. He couldn't fix what was broken inside Audie Murphy. No one could, but he could be present, and sometimes that was enough. Drake later said he learned more about courage from watching Murphy face his demons than he ever learned from any script. True heroism wasn't charging into battle. It was showing up day after day to confront the thing that terrified you most. Number 10. The film used real military equipment. Tanks, rifles, uniforms, everything authenticated by the Department of Defense. Universal wanted accuracy, and they got it. Except the equipment carried its own ghosts. Some of the rifles on set were the same models Murphy had used in combat. When he picked one up for the first time, his hands remembered the weight, the balance, the muscle memory of aiming, firing, reloading without thinking. It wasn't a prop. It was a time machine. Murphy later told the armorer he didn't need training on how to handle the weapons. His body already knew, and that knowledge sat heavy in his chest. Because these weren't tools anymore. They were reminders of every life he took, every enemy soldier he killed to survive, every moral compromise war demanded. The studio thought authenticity would add credibility, and it did, but it also added weight Murphy couldn't put down. Every time he picked up a rifle for a scene, he felt it, the past pressing against the present, the boy he used to be, confronting the man he'd become. And somewhere in the middle, Audie Murphy played a character named Audie Murphy, and wondered if he'd ever stop being a soldier. even when the camera stopped rolling. Number 11. The premiere nearly didn't happen, not because of production issues or studio politics, because Audie Murphy refused to attend. He told Universal he couldn't sit in a theater and watch himself relive the worst moments of his life while people ate popcorn and applauded. The studio panicked. The star skipping his own premiere would kill publicity. They begged. They offered more money. They promised he could leave early. Murphy said no. For weeks, it looked like To Hell and Back would premiere without its lead. Then Murphy's wife stepped in. She told him the veterans needed to see him there. The men who'd served, the families who'd lost sons. They needed to know someone understood, someone remembered. So Murphy went. He sat in the back row, wore his uniform, and the moment the film started, he wanted to run. The battle sounds were too real, the explosions too loud, the screams too familiar. Halfway through, he stood up to leave. But then he noticed something. Veterans throughout the theater, sitting perfectly still, some crying, some frozen. And Murphy realized they were all trapped in the same nightmare. So he sat back down, stayed until the end. And when the lights came up, dozens of veterans waited to shake his hand. They didn't thank him for his service. They thanked him for telling the truth, for not making it look easy or noble or fun, for showing war exactly as it was. Number 12. The director had never served in combat. Jesse Hibbs was a former football player turned filmmaker. He'd made westerns and crime dramas. Nothing prepared him for directing a war film starring a man who'd actually lived it. At first, Hibbs tried to direct Murphy like any other actor, blocking, motivation, emotional beats. Murphy would nod politely, then do it completely differently. Hibbs was frustrated until he watched the dailies and realized Murphy's instincts were better than anything he could have directed. Murphy moved like a soldier because he was a soldier. He reacted to gunfire before it happened because his body remembered combat rhythms. He couldn't fake the exhaustion or fear because they weren't fake. So Hibbs changed his approach. He stopped directing Murphy and started following him. He'd set up scenes, then let Murphy move through them naturally. The camera adjusted to Murphy, not the other way around. Other actors struggled with this. They needed marks, cues, direction, but Murphy just existed in the moment, and Hibbs learned something profound. Sometimes the best directing is knowing when to step back, when to let truth unfold without interference. By the end of production, Hibbs called it the most difficult and most important film he'd ever made. Not because of technical challenges, because he'd watched a man bleed for art, and nothing in film school prepares you for that. Number 13. Murphy's hands shook constantly during filming. Not from fear, from nerve damage. Years of firing weapons, handling explosives, and physical trauma had left his hands with a permanent tremor. Most days it was manageable, but under stress, under lights, surrounded by simulated warfare, it got worse. The camera crew noticed. They'd have to cut takes because Murphy couldn't hold a rifle steady, or light a cigarette, or even salute without his hand shaking visibly. Some suggested using a double for close-ups. Murphy refused. He said if his hands shook in the movie, that was honest. That's what war did to people. It broke them in ways that never fully healed. The studio worried it would make him look weak. Murphy didn't care. He wasn't trying to look like a hero. He was trying to show what heroes actually looked like after the medals were awarded and the parades ended. Broken, tired, still fighting battles no one else could see. So they kept the trembling hands in the film. In some scenes, you can see it clearly. Murphy struggling to control his own body. And that vulnerability, that visible damage, made everything more powerful. Because real soldiers recognized it immediately. They'd lived with their own tremors, their own invisible wounds. And seeing Audie Murphy, America's most decorated soldier, unable to control his shaking hands, told them something crucial. They weren't weak. They were human. And the damage was real. Number 14. The film's most emotional scene wasn't scripted. Murphy was supposed to deliver a simple line about losing his best friend. Stand, speak, move on. But when the cameras rolled, something broke. Murphy started the line, stopped, his voice cracked. He tried again. Couldn't finish. The director called, "Cut." Murphy waved him off. "Keep rolling." He stood there for almost a minute, silent. Tears streaming down his face. not actor tears. Real grief. A decade old and still fresh. The crew didn't move, didn't breathe. They just watched as Audie Murphy mourned his friend all over again. Finally, he looked up at the camera and spoke. Not the scripted line, just the truth. How it felt to watch someone die. How you carry that weight forever. How sorry he was for surviving. When Hibbs yelled cut, the entire set was silent, grown men wiping their eyes. The scene was too raw to use in full. They edited it down, softened it. But even the shortened version hit like a bullet, because everyone watching knew they weren't seeing a performance. They were seeing a man torn open. And sometimes the most powerful moments in cinema happen when the actor forgets they're acting, when the role disappears, and all that's left is pain, pure, unfiltered, unforgivable. Number 15. Universal buried the film's violence in promotion. Posters showed Murphy smiling in uniform. Taglines emphasized heroism and victory. What they didn't show was the blood, the death, the brutality that filled the actual film. The studio knew they had something darker than audiences expected, so they sold it as a traditional war picture, patriotic, uplifting, inspiring. Audiences showed up expecting John Wayne. They got something else entirely. Some walked out, others complained to theater managers. The film was too violent, too depressing, too real, but something strange happened. Word of mouth spread. Veterans started telling other veterans to see it. Families of soldiers who died began recommending it, because finally, someone had shown the truth. The film's box office grew, week after week. Not because of studio marketing, because people who'd experienced war recognized honesty when they saw it, and they told everyone who'd listen. This isn't a war movie, it's a documentary wrapped in drama. It's what actually happened, and if you can't handle it, that's the point. War isn't supposed to be entertaining, it's supposed to be hell. Murphy never promoted the film, didn't do interviews, didn't tour. He'd said everything he needed to say on screen, and audiences either understood or they didn't. He was done explaining. Number 16. The film cost Murphy his marriage. His first one anyway, the nightmares, the drinking, the isolation. His wife watched him disappear into the role and never fully come back. He'd wake up screaming, couldn't be touched without flinching, spent hours staring into nothing. She tried to help, tried to understand, but Murphy had built walls no one could climb. He'd tell her he was fine, everything was fine, while inside he was drowning. The film forced him to confront every trauma he'd spent a decade burying, and once those doors opened, he couldn't close them. His wife felt helpless. She'd married a hero, but the man living in her house was a ghost, haunted, hollowed out, unreachable. By the time filming wrapped, their marriage was over. She filed for divorce quietly. No press, no drama, just two people who couldn't survive what war had done. Murphy didn't fight it, didn't blame her. He knew he'd become impossible to live with. The film took everything. His peace, his privacy, his last chance at normal life, and left him with what? A movie, applause, fame. None of it worth the cost. Years later, Murphy admitted making the film was both the most important and most destructive decision of his life. It honored the dead and killed something vital in him, the part that still hoped he could move on. Forget. Be anything other than a soldier. Number 17. Jack Kelly, who played Murphy's brother, didn't realize how serious the production was until day 3. He thought it was just another studio war picture. Show up, hit your marks, cash the check. But watching Murphy work, watching him struggle, watching him break, Kelly understood this was different. During one scene, Murphy was supposed to react to his character's brother being wounded. Simple, emotional beat. Murphy couldn't do it. He kept trying, kept failing. Finally, he told Kelly, "I can't pretend. I saw this happen. I held him while he died." Kelly had no response. What do you say to that? He started paying closer attention, noticed how Murphy avoided eye contact between takes, how he smoked cigarette after cigarette, how he'd flinch at sudden noises. Kelly wasn't a veteran, hadn't seen combat, but he saw what combat had done, and it changed how he played every scene. He stopped acting like a movie soldier and started moving like he imagined a real one would, scared, tired, trying to stay alive. After the film wrapped, Kelly stayed in touch with Murphy, called him every few months, never talked about the movie, just checked in, made sure Murphy was still standing because he'd seen the cost and felt responsible, not for causing it, for witnessing it. And anyone who witnessed Audie Murphy's pain carried a piece of it. Number 18. The Academy ignored it. To Hell and Back wasn't nominated for a single Oscar. Not Murphy for acting, not the screenplay, not the direction or cinematography, nothing. The studio was furious. Murphy was the most decorated soldier in American history, playing himself in one of the most honest war films ever made. And Hollywood pretended it didn't exist. The reason became clear later. The Academy didn't know what to do with Murphy. He wasn't trained, wasn't part of the system, wasn't really an actor in the traditional sense, and the film itself was too uncomfortable, too raw, too close to reality for an industry built on fantasy. War films were supposed to be epic, grand. To Hell and Back was small, personal, painful. It didn't fit the mold, so they ignored it. Murphy didn't care publicly, said awards meant nothing compared to serving your country. But privately, it stung. Not for himself. For the veterans who'd poured their truth into the film. For the crew who'd worked around his trauma. For everyone who believed honesty mattered more than polish. The film found its audience anyway. Became Universal's highest grossing picture of 1955. Ran in theaters for months. But the Oscar snub remains one of Hollywood's most glaring mistakes. They had a chance to honor real heroism, real sacrifice, real truth, and they chose to look away. Because sometimes truth is harder to celebrate than fantasy. Number 19. Murphy slept with a loaded gun under his pillow for the rest of his life. The nightmares never stopped. Not after filming, not after therapy, not ever. He'd wake up thinking he was back in Europe, reach for a weapon, and if he didn't find one, the panic would consume him. So he kept a pistol within reach. Always. His friends knew. His later wives knew. Everyone who got close to Murphy learned to accept it. You don't wake him suddenly. Don't touch him while he's sleeping. Don't make loud noises without warning. These weren't quirks. They were survival mechanisms. The film had opened wounds that never closed. And Murphy spent the rest of his life managing damage that was never supposed to heal on camera. He tried medication, tried talking, tried drowning it in alcohol, and later, pills. Nothing worked. War had rewired his brain, taught him that danger was constant, that death could come from anywhere, that trust was a liability. And Making to Hell and Back had reinforced every lesson by forcing him to relive it, by making him perform his trauma for millions. Murphy became an advocate for veteran mental health in his later years, spoke openly about PTSD before it had a name, told the world that heroes weren't invincible, they were damaged, and they needed help, not worship. His honesty saved lives, but it couldn't save his own. Number 20. Murphy died in a plane crash. 1971, 16 years after To Hell and Back premiered. He survived 200 combat missions, faced death daily for 3 years of war, earned every medal the Army could give, and in the end, it was a small private plane in bad weather that killed him. He was 45 years old. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. America's greatest war hero survived hell only to die in a preventable accident. His funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, full military honors. Thousands attended, and veterans lined up to say the same thing. Audie Murphy showed us the truth about war, about courage, about the cost of heroism. To Hell and Back wasn't just a film, it was testimony, a soldier's last stand against the lies we tell about combat. Murphy knew making it might break him, and he did it anyway, because some truths are worth dying for. And if you're going to tell a story about war, you'd better be willing to bleed. Murphy bled, on screen, off screen, for the rest of his short, painful, complicated life. And we're still watching, still learning, still trying to understand what it cost him to show us what hell actually looks like. Bonus fact, after Murphy died, his family found hundreds of letters, from veterans, from widows, from soldiers still serving, all saying the same thing. Your film saved my life, not literally, but emotionally. It told them they weren't alone, that someone understood, that the nightmares and fear and guilt were normal. Murphy never answered most of the letters, couldn't bring himself to, but he kept every single one in a box, under his bed, right next to the loaded gun, because even though the film nearly destroyed him, even though he regretted the pain it caused, he knew it mattered. Not for Hollywood, not for his career, for them, the soldiers no one else would listen to, the damaged, the forgotten, the ones still fighting wars no one else could see. To Hell and Back wasn't entertainment, it was a mirror, held up to a nation that wanted to celebrate heroes without acknowledging their scars. And Audie Murphy held that mirror steady, even when it reflected his own broken face, even when it cost him everything. Because some missions don't end when the cameras stop rolling. Some battles last a lifetime. And the real heroism isn't dying for your country. It's living with what your country asked you to do, and still choosing to tell the truth.